From New York to our Bloomberg television and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power, where the world of politics meets the world of business. I'm David Westin. We have two major lawmakers ahead for you today. First, Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi, and also Dick Durbin, the number 2 Democrat in the Senate. He is the Senate Minority Whip. They'll both be joining us on Balance of Power. But right now, we want to get a check on the markets. And for that, we have Abigail Doolittle. Abigail, I looked at the screens. Strikes me that investors are just in the mood to buy almost anything. Equities, bonds, oil, you name it.
It is the everything rally once again. That was a theme last year, and we're seeing that on the day. A risk-on tone overall, despite that dismal jobs data. Once again, a disconnect between Main Street and Wall Street. Right now, the S&P 500 up about 1.8%. In fact, on pace for its best day in about 2 weeks. As you were mentioning, oil is also trading higher, soaring up 6.5% over the last 6 or 7 days, up about 100%. So a risk-on mood. You can see that the FANGs are lagging just a little bit, up 1% as opposed to that S&P 500 being up closer to 2%. That, of course, those momentum stocks have been the engine of this rally. So pay attention to that. But overall, the intraday volatility, that choppiness we were talking about yesterday, seems to be fading. And another interesting piece of today's movement, we have the Canadian dollar soaring against the U.S. dollar. That is probably with the oil rally. However, you were mentioning that everything is rallying, or many asset classes. That's true too for bonds. The 2-year yield, in fact, not so long ago, carving out a record low. Of course, price trades inverse to yield, so that tells you bonds are rallying in a big way. So while stocks are rallying, you still have investors going toward those haven bonds, suggesting that they do have their eye on the economic picture. This awful jobs data, of course, the non-farm payrolls report coming out tomorrow, which will be absolutely devastating, not just from an economic standpoint, more importantly from a human standpoint. So bonds are telling that story. The question is, though, will we at some point see more of a connection between stocks and that economic data or not? Or are we just going to have investors simply look past the data toward the liquidity that the Fed has been providing, David? But today, certainly a risk-on tone.
Yeah, that's what they've been doing so far, at least. Okay, thank you so much to Abigail Doolittle. Our colleague, Mike McKee, got to talk earlier, just a few minutes ago, actually, with Mary Daly. She's the president of the San Francisco Fed. And among other things, they talked about what shape this economy may take as it recovers.
Like every other company in the United States and even globally, they're feeling a lot of pain right now because we've had to shelter in place for public health. And they know that. They want to do the right thing, but they are definitely feeling the pain. Now, when thinking about getting past this, they're doing everything in their power to get their finances in order, take advantage of the programs that are available either from Congress or the Fed to ensure that they can get past this and be ready to reopen, but do it safely. No one who I talk to is looking at a V-shaped recovery. They really think this will be gradual, and it will take time to build confidence back up for both workers and consumers as they re-engage in economic activity. But they are more optimistic than you might think. They're ready to reopen and re-engage.
I know you want the Paycheck Protection Plan to help, but is there some evidence that it's doing that? Are companies hiring back workers now?
Well, the Paycheck Protection Program is really about keeping workers that they have. And when the economy reopens, then we expect those workers to come back and actually perform work. But right now, most of the country remains in shelter in place. And so we're just providing emergency support to businesses and to employees with unemployment insurance so that we can get through this and wait to reopen.
Well, the Main Street program still not up and running. Is there a chance that that's going to get started too late to be of real help?
Well, the Main Street program, one of the things that with all the Fed's facilities is there have been these what we would call announcement effects, that when we say we're going to have a facility, the markets start to function better. And we're already seeing that across the board in all the areas where there were dislocations. So no, I don't think it's going to be too late to be effective. I think it's already helping markets do the lending that's so important for American businesses and households.
I don't really want to get into the alphabet business of V's and W's and things like that, but you were kind of negative about the idea of any kind of growth this year. You didn't see a couple weeks ago any kind of expansion until 2021. Is that still your view?
My view is that 2020 as a whole, so let's move out of the quarterly math and just think in annual data, that 2020 as a whole is going to be a negative year, and then we'll start to see positive year in 2021. I think that's about as good as forecasting can get right now, this quarterly forecasting. Forecasting is always a tough business, but it's become very tough right now because it's so dependent on the evolution of the virus and what actions we have to take to constrain it.
Obviously, the markets are seeing things a little bit differently. I'm wondering what you think of that and the idea that just a short while ago, the Fed funds futures market priced in negative interest rates starting in January. I know that's not a policy procedure that you guys are really interested in, but what do you think of the way investors are looking at it?
I think investors are looking at it as, essentially the coronavirus is with us until we get a vaccine or some nice way to control it and, helpful way to control it. And they see that as distant, and then they price that in. And that's what we're all dealing with. But I am a evidence-based optimist, I guess, and the evidence I'm seeing is we came into this coronavirus with a strong economic momentum, one of the strongest economies in our lifetimes, and we're already seeing, businesses are fundamentally entrepreneurial, and we're already seeing them start to think about, okay, how do we re-engage while we live with the coronavirus until we do get a vaccine or some other remediation program. So I have a little bit more optimism there.
Municipal finances kind of in tatters around the country. What are you hearing from cities and states in your district?
Well, cities and states in my district are really in trouble. They're struggling, and they're trying to do the thing that we're all trying to do, which is figure out where can we cut costs when revenues go down. So they're facing tremendous declines in revenues, and then they're figuring out where can we keep essential services and what cuts can we make. So this is just hard, and we're working actively with all of our states and localities to think about what's the best way to make these difficult choices so that we can all get to the other side of the coronavirus and be well positioned to go forward.
That was Mary Daly. She is the San Francisco Fed president, speaking with our colleague Michael McKee. And Michael, I'm delighted to say, is with us now. So, Mike, great interview as usual. So not a V. She does seem to think it will recover based on the fact that companies are eager to get back to work. But are they going to be able to? Didn't we hear from Jim Bullard, her colleague over at St. Louis, saying if we don't get back to work sooner or later, we're going to have a depression?
Yeah, one of the things that Mary Daly went on to say a little bit later in the interview was that confidence is key. People have to believe that they can go out and be safe before they're going to go shopping, before they're going to go to restaurants. And businesses have to believe that they can keep people safe before they reopen. And so that's going to be the big holdup through the summer, is trying to get to that level of confidence that people would be able to resume economic activity. And because of the virus, we just don't know how fast that's going to happen.
And what about that Main Street lending program? You asked her about that. I wasn't sure she directly answered your question whether it might be too late.
Well, she didn't think it's going to be too late, but it's obviously going to take a little while to get out there. This isn't straight program to just keep people on the payroll, although that's a component of it. It's essentially to keep businesses alive until they can start rehiring and reopen for business. And I guess her feeling is that money will get out there in time, although the Fed is having trouble getting it started because there are questions about some of the restrictions that Congress put in the legislation.
Any sense of whether they might expand, the Fed might expand beyond where it's gone already in some of its lending programs?
Right now, they're not giving any indication that they're going to, and Mary Daly didn't talk about that, but they certainly have the room to do so because they have more money in the Treasury backstop. We're looking at the PPP program, and so far it hasn't used up all of the second tranche, so there seems to be, they seem to have enough at the moment. If the economy takes another leg down, they could go farther if they need to. And this is all about putting a floor under the economy, of course, when it comes time to try to do some stimulation. She suggested, they're in this range of 0 to 25 basis points now. She suggested they could just go straight to 0, and then they could adopt forward guidance and QE to try to bring down longer rates and give some more stimulus to the economy.
One of the things that struck me is she doesn't want to talk about quarter by quarter, but she said in terms of years, we're going to have a negative number on GDP this year. We'll get a positive number next year. I guess that's encouraging, but not terribly encouraging, Mike.
She's among the more pessimistic on the Fed in terms of how fast we'll start to see growth again. She thinks we could see it into the fourth quarter, a contraction into the fourth quarter. But then in 2021, we'll start to see growth. The problem with Mary Daly has been an economist for many, many years. The problem, she says, is it's just too hard to make a forecast right now. There are too many variables, particularly the course of the virus itself.
That seems fair enough. Okay, thank you so much. That is Michael McKee. He is Chief International Policy and Economics Correspondent for Bloomberg. Great to have you with us, Mike. Coming up next on Balance of Power, we're going to talk with Dick Durbin. He is the Senate Minority Whip. That makes him the second most powerful Democrat in the Senate. That's coming up on Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio. Welcome back to Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Westin. We now welcome to Balance of Power Senator Dick Durbin. He is the Senate Minority Whip, the #2 Democrat in the Senate. Thank you so much, Senator, for joining us today. I think I want to start, of course, with the coronavirus, but specifically on the human toll this is taking. We have more unemployment reported, more to come, I'm afraid. We also have the disease itself and even the deaths. And you've talked about the situation in the state of Illinois. And we talk about these terrible numbers, but in fact, they are disproportionately hitting people of color, African Americans and particularly Hispanics.
We started asking the question when people came in and said they were infected, took down the information, and we found that disproportionately African Americans, now Hispanics, are coming up with dramatically larger numbers than we expected when it comes to the illness. A friend of mine back home put it well, I thought. He said, this coronavirus is not going to break us, but it's going to teach us about what's broken in America. And what's broken clearly is our healthcare system. We've got to reach the point in this country where everyone has access to affordable, quality healthcare. We certainly don't have that at this moment.
Can we do that in time to really address the issues here? Is this for the future?
It's more for the future, but we can start acting on it now. I spoke to Dr. Redfield yesterday at the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, and I said, we need healthcare workers in the neighborhoods of Chicago, and doctor, I can point them out to you. We need people knocking on doors and talking to people. If we're going to bring this infection under control, this virus under control, that kind of healthcare investment is going to find the people who have the most susceptibility to developing this infection and spreading it, and stop them from doing that. Teach them the kind of conduct that's going to be good for them and good for all of us.
There is the healthcare aspect of this. It's first and foremost a personal tragedy. There also is the economic effect as we see so many people out of jobs right now. Are you sympathetic, Senator, to President Trump's instinct to say we need to get the economy going again to give these people's jobs back?
Oh, definitely. There's no question about it, but we want to do it in a smart way. Your previous segment here talked about when the American people are ready to return to the economy. That's an important thing. At this point, there's a skepticism. We don't believe that we've won this battle completely. We believe as a nation we need to keep fighting. You know, we've gone through a terrible experience here. We've done it one time. We don't want to do it a second time. Let's get this right. Let's not reopen too soon. Let's pay a tribute to those healthcare workers who risk their lives every single day and show some sacrifice on our own part, too.
There's talk now about the Democrats on both sides of the Capitol Hill working on a new round of support for the U.S. economy. What is essential in that new round when it comes?
Well, there are several things that I think we ought to keep in mind. The early investments we made of $2.7 trillion are unprecedented, but they were really geared toward the economy moving forward starting on July 1st. That's when the unemployment benefits start to end, at least the federal boost. That's when we see an end to the small business loans that are being forgiven. But I think that's an optimistic scenario. Most of us understand that the problems aren't going to end as of July 1st. We'll be lucky if we start to really turn the corner by then. So we can't get weak-kneed at this moment. We've invested in this economy to avoid a depression. We have to continue to do that. I would put additional investment in helping state and local governments through this difficult period. I would certainly do my best to help the healthcare workers with hazard pay. We definitely need more testing. That is the key to reopening the economy. Those are the starting points.
So at some point we're going to have to pay for all of this. We heard from Larry Fink yesterday of BlackRock saying that he thinks that corporate taxes are going to have to go up. Is he right?
I don't want to get into that conversation at this moment. At this point, we're trying to stabilize the patient, for goodness sakes. Let's not talk about the long-term care issues, and we know that we will have to face them. But if we don't do this right, if we decide to give half a dose of medicine to the American economy, we're going to plunge into a depression which is much more costly than anything that's being envisioned.
So, Senator, the coronavirus and the response to it is not the only thing on the Senate agenda right now. There's also a nomination for the D.C. Circuit of Judge Justin Walker, a district court judge out in Kentucky. Could you please explain what the problem is with this nomination, and frankly, why is it being taken up right now?
Well, you ought to ask Senator McConnell that question. He reconvened the Senate, brought us back with our staff and all of the people that keep this Capitol building running. You would expect that he would focus on the #1 issue facing America, this national emergency, this public health crisis. He wanted to focus on a 37-year-old federal judge in Kentucky that he wants to give a promotion to. It's an embarrassment. We should have been here doing the business of the people, which means addressing this great danger and threat to America, not some political favor he owes somebody in Kentucky.
Is the problem with the merits of the nomination? Is it with the overall redoing of the federal courts of appeals across the country, which has been going on for some time now? Or is it just a question of we can't get to it right now, we should come up later with that once we've dealt with the pandemic?
I can answer that question very simply. The vacancy this man is supposed to fill does not occur until September. Until September. And we had to come back here at some risk to the health of our staff and people who are working here so that Senator McConnell can keep his promise to this friend of his in Kentucky. The fact of the matter is he wants to fill every vacancy at any cost, and he proved it this week.
Last question, Senator Durbin. In terms of getting the next round of support done, is it important to start with the Senate Republicans so you have some bipartisanship, or can it start on the House side with the Democrats?
It starts with Speaker Pelosi this next round, and she's working on a proposal that we'll see in just a short period of time. I'm not certain when. I've heard a little bit about it. And we're going to sit down, of course, with Mr. Mnuchin, the Treasury Secretary. And I've got to say, I've been told he's a great negotiator and a good person to sit down with. He doesn't give in easily, but he looks for a compromise. That's what we're looking forward to.
Okay. Senator Durbin, I really appreciate your time today. That is Senator Dick Durbin. He is Senate Minority Whip joining us from Capitol Hill. And this is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Westin. Europe is struggling with the coronavirus every bit as much as the United States, and our colleague Francine Lacqua got to sit down with the ECB president, Madame Christine Lagarde, earlier today.
Central banks, ECB included, are driven by their mandate. They have the privilege of being independent institutions, accountable to, for myself, the European Parliament, to which I report back and am accountable to, and I go every 3 months to tell about our action and our tools and how we measure them and how we assess them. But we are also mandate driven, and mandate dictates that we do whatever is necessary and whatever is needed in order to actually deliver on our purpose, which will be a factor of circumstances. To give you an example, we are currently, and we've all said the same thing, going through exceptional circumstances. The global economy and the euro area, where I'm located and where I have to be active, is facing this unprecedented shock that we could not have imagined. Well, in that case, you clearly have to go beyond the normal, including the normal and conventional tools, to use things that are of an exceptional nature and that have to be designed, calibrated, and with the appropriate level of deviation and room to maneuver in order to actually deliver on that mandate, whether it is to avoid the tightening of financing condition, or whether it is to make sure that monetary policy is transmitted across all jurisdictions in the euro area. That's what we need to do. And we are actually doing it, and we will continue doing so, because that's what drives our action.
What's on top of your worry list as a central banker?
You know, it might surprise you, but I fear two W. W number one is war, because I think that on the top of everything that we have at the moment, that would be just the most aggravating factor that we could face. And my second W is the second wave, if we ever had a second wave. When we look at analogies, you know, like the Spanish flu, unnecessarily called Spanish for that matter, the second wave was even worse than the first. So those are the two things that I have on my mind from, you know, a humanitarian, from as a person. Now, if I look at the economic consequences of all that, clearly, even without those W's that are my fears, I think that we have the most unprecedented economic crisis that we have seen in peacetime. I've said that before. And the damage that it is inflicting on our economies around the world, that Kristalina knows better than I do at this point in time, is really causing damages to potential output, to families, to jobs, to the capacity to bounce back. And we simply have no real good sense of how badly economies are affected. We're all proceeding on the basis of scenarios because we simply don't know. And it's all going to be a factor of how we get out of those lockdown measures, at which pace, at which sequence. And if we do, we don't know either how fast and how strong the recovery will be, because it will be a factor again of the measures that are taken at this point in time. So that's really the situation that we have. And in the face of that, we have to take all possible measures and policies to help with maintaining the situation, sustaining it for as long as necessary to weather this horrible shock, and help families, firms, and governments bounce back and move into a recovery phase. Clearly, you know, the nearly 4 million people affected around the world, a quarter of which are affected in the euro area, is on my mind all the time. And I also venture beyond those borders, because I think of all people in the developing world, which clearly is taking a big hit and will continue to take a big hit, despite the fact that health systems are not as solid as they are in advanced economies.
That was ECB President Madame Christine Lagarde talking to our colleague Francine Lacqua earlier today. Coming up next on Balance of Power, we are going to get to talk with the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi. We've just heard from Dick Durbin on the Senate side that really she needs to take the lead in the next round of support for the economy. We're going to ask her exactly what that's going to look like and how she can get bipartisan support. And this is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Westin. Well, the House of Representatives is back in town, although not quite yet back in session. And the Democrats are really undertaking an effort to have another round of support for the economy in the middle of this coronavirus epidemic. We now are going to talk with the person who's leading the plan to put that together, and that is Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi. Madam Speaker, thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate it. We just talked to Dick Durbin, the Minority Whip, who said that the lead on this really has to be Speaker Pelosi. Why is it so important that this originate with you in the House of Representatives?
Well, the Constitution calls for that. The Constitution says that all appropriations bills must originate in the House. In the bill that the Senate did, they used a House bill to do that, but that was the interim bill. The bill of consequence will begin in the House of Representatives, and it is imminent. We'll be having something soon.
So what is essential from your point of view as you go into this? Because you said you wanted to be bipartisan if possible. What is essential for you to have included in this bill?
Well, let me just say that I'm very proud that our first 4 bills on this subject have been all bipartisan, overwhelmingly bipartisan. As we take up this 5th bill, we're following the path of what was in the other bills. For example, we had state and local in the first CARES bill, CARES 1, and that is what we have in this bill. Honor our heroes. police and fire, healthcare providers, transit workers, teachers, all of the people who, postal workers, all of the people who make our system work, and in many cases risk their lives to save other people's lives, and now they may lose their job because of the revenue loss as well as coronavirus costs that states and municipalities are suffering. So A. B, if we open up, the key to opening up, to unlocking the lockdown is testing, 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 tracing, 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 treatment, treatment, treatment. We have to do that. Science requires it. Everyone agrees that we have to. It's a health issue that is going to solve the financial issue as well. And then third, we want to put money in people's pockets. Honor our heroes, state and local. Testing, testing, testing. Let's make sure that we address the disparities and all the rest by identifying really where this cruel virus is creeping out there. It's so scary. And then third, putting money in people's pockets. What do we do? Unemployment insurance, whether we do issues that relate to direct payments and the rest of that. That's what we have to do. Now, we had all three of those in the previous bills. So this is not plowing any new territory. It's digging deeper. It's more money. For example, state and local, it has the support of Republican and Democratic governors throughout the country. Also the municipalities and counties, bipartisan support throughout the country. It's a big ticket because it's a big challenge. It's only for coronavirus, that is outlays and revenue loss. Again,
as you say,
now there's some issues that we just don't, that are philosophical, that we haven't been able to crack, and that is food stamps, SNAP, the SNAP program. For some reason, that's not something that we can get the other side to agree on, but we have to do it, and the American people know that we have to do that. Brookings Institute just put out a report that moms say that 1 in 4 children do not have any, they are food insecure. 1 in 4 children in our country. It's always been a problem, more like 1 in 5, 1 in 6. Now it's exacerbated by all of this. So again, there's some issues that are traditional debates that we have, but there shouldn't be any question that we would have. Now, food stamps, unemployment insurance, direct payments, so many of these things serve as a stimulus to the economy as well. So the chairman of the Fed said, think big. Interest rates are so low, think big, and we're taking his guidance on that.
Madam Speaker, you said that for some reason you can't get the Republican side to move on food stamps. Can they get you to move on some of the things that they want, such as payroll tax? That's something President Trump keeps talking about, even capital gains tax. Are you willing to put on the table at least some adjustments in taxation?
Well, let me just say this. If you want to compare the need for us to change the capital gains tax, which once again ignores the fact that there are people in our country that are hungry and that there's some equivalence to that, I respectfully disagree. There are certain things that are urgent. They're urgent. To have a discussion of tax policy, save that for another day and do it in a bipartisan way. But don't draw any lines in the sand. We're not. He shouldn't.
Do you have a sense at this point? I understand the plan isn't put together. You have a sense of how big this might be. How big is this bread box, do we think?
Yeah, big. It'll be big. Well, see, for example, when we went from state and local, that was how we embraced it before. Now it's state and local, separate. And so it practically doubled what we would be doing. And it's a big ticket item. We're doing the testing in a way that has a strategic plan. That's what we asked them to do in the last bill. We had testing in our March 4th bill that passed the House that day. We had testing in the most recent bill. We still do not have what the scientists tell us is necessary to reach out into the communities with a band of people to do the tracing so that we can rid ourselves of this plague. And that costs money. And then the direct payments, that's a big ticket item, and that's what we are working on now. Where do we get the most return for the best help to our people who are desperate? People are desperate. They're heartbroken because of loss of life, threat to life, but so many of their aspirations professionally, businesses, community involvement and the rest are so stifled by what's happening, and we really have to address that. And if we don't, it's going to cost us a lot more money. So this is a prevention in many ways. It's preventing a greater loss. And you know, it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity to do something working together that people, ordinary people, day-to-day people, I don't think anybody's ordinary, but you know, that it can say they're doing something that really affects me instead of some trickle-down attitude that they seem to be used to, and it doesn't feel nice to get trickled on.
Madam Speaker, it's clear you find this urgent. You've said why you think it is urgent. On the other hand, we hear from the Republicans, some of them saying, you know, well, let's wait a while and see how the first few bills work themselves out. Can you give us a sense of timing? I know that you're going around to chairs and talking about what should be included, but could we expect a plan by, for example, next week?
We could, because I disagree with our colleagues. I could totally disagree. It is urgent. People are dying. People are suffering. We want to open up our economy. People want out. But the key to getting out is the testing. These are all related, and they're related in every way to data. They didn't mind coming back with more money for this or that without any data as to what was working best. But when it comes to feeding people, they can wait for that. And that's a matter of the health and well-being of the American people. So I completely disagree with that. While I think it's important to learn from what legislation we pass in every case, but that should not deter us or block us from meeting the urgent needs of the American people. And I think that there are people in the public, and when you ask these questions in the country, the bipartisan support for them is overwhelming for honoring our heroes, state and local, testing and the rest, the Postal Service. All these things have very broad support among Republicans as well. So we're talking about public sentiment coming to the rescue of our country, of our democracy, really, because so much of what the middle class is the backbone of our democracy, and those who aspire to it. And if we're undermining that, that undermines our democracy.
Madam
And we
Speaker,
do have money in for voting, by the way. We have money in there for voting for a vote by mail, which we think is a health imperative now, even though Democrats and Republicans support vote by mail. But right now, it is an imperative. That's a small item in the scheme of things.
I was going to ask you about that. Is that essential from your point of view? You have talked before about vote by mail this coming November.
Well, vote by mail is something, again, everything we're talking about has bipartisan support, and vote by mail does as well. The National Association of Secretaries of State, which is headed by a Republican president or chairman, whatever they call him, has written to us to say remove some of the obstacles to voting by mail that were in the CARES 1. So there's a recognition that to conduct elections consistent with trends in our country, but also recognizing the danger to health to have so many people showing up on election day is something that is not any partisan any place except maybe in the Congress of the United States, but hopefully not. They'll hear from their constituents, I hope.
As I understand it, the House is not actually in session right now, although the people are gathered in Washington. When can it go back into session, and how concerned are you about the safety of the members?
I'm very concerned about the safety of the members, but not only the members, the custodians of the building, the staffing of the Congress in terms of the Congress. I'm not talking about individual members staffing, that too. But there are thousands of people who make Congress work, and it's not just about us, it's about them. And we will come back we have come back twice for a voice vote one day and another day for a couple of recorded votes, and we had a regimen that was established by the Sergeant at Arms and the Capitol Physician, and those are the terms under which we will come back again. We were going to come this week, and the they informed us it's better next week because of what's happening in the District of Columbia. So that's when we'll come back, and again, we want to move with voting by proxy, remote voting by proxy, so those people who shouldn't come back, that we don't want to come back if they, have a fever or somebody in their home does, can be registered in the voting by proxy in a very limited way for a very limited time. So
Madam Speaker, one of the things that you really fought hard for, sorry.
I'm sorry.
One of the things that you fought hard for in one of the earlier bills was that there be an oversight commission on how some of the money is spent. It would have Democrats on it and Republicans. There have been members appointed, but we don't have a chair yet because, as I understand, you and Senator McConnell have to agree on that. Where are we in that process? Are you eager to get that oversight going?
Yeah. Well, we've been talking about it for about 3 weeks, and I have my proposals there. I'm waiting to hear from the senator on his most current appropriate. I hope that we could resolve it this week because it's essential to do. I think that we can come to terms. I wish we could have done it sooner, but I hope that we can do it in the next day or so. That would be my hope.
Okay.
I've made my proposals.
Okay, Madam Speaker.
Anyway, that will be important to do. In any event, thank you for your attention to this issue. Remember, it's all an investment. It's a prevention for this not getting worse in terms of the toll to our life, our livelihood, the lives of the American people, the livelihood of the American people, and of course, the life of our democracy. Thank you.
Madam Speaker, thank you so very much for being with us today. Really appreciate it. That's Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi. Coming up next on Balance of Power, we're going to talk about apparently a way that the wealthy can pass some money along to their children without paying any gift or estate tax. That's coming up next. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and radio. I'm David Westin. Well, it turns out those historically low interest rates may also help some wealthy individuals pass on some money to their children, some of their estate, in a way that's more tax beneficial than otherwise. We welcome now Maddie Duppler, and she is National Taxpayers Union Senior Fellow. Maddie, always great to have you on taxes. There was a piece on the Bloomberg explaining this, and I didn't understand it, but explain how it works. There's a statutory rate, is there, that you can charge for loans to your kids?
So there's a statutory rate that dictates the estate tax, which is sometimes called the death tax. But then, of course, in statute, there also are rules that prevent parents from trying to get around that estate tax by gifting money to their kids. So there's a law that dictates you can only give $15,000 to your child every year. That will count accumulated if you go over that towards the gift tax, towards the estate tax, if at the end of your life you're looking to pass along your estate, that starts to accrue. So what that is that's a way to try and keep people from getting around the estate tax by using gifting earlier in their life to pass along some of their wealth to their kids.
But under the current situation, as I understand it, the rate of interest you have to charge your kids if you loan them the money rather than just give it to them outright is sometimes below 1%, which allows you to loan money to your children at lower than 1% that they can in turn invest and make some money off of.
Well, this is a reflection on the current interest rate environment, right? I mean, interest rates typically get higher when the economic outlook is more positive. Currently, we're in the opposite situation with this pandemic, which is a deeply unsettling event, which drives interest rates lower. As we've talked many times about bond volatility and what that's doing to interest rates. But the reflection here on what that does for intra-family gifting and the tax implications therein really depends on the tools that families are using. There's plenty of tools out there for estates to try to mitigate their tax effects. But the thing to keep in mind is that in each of these cases, the beneficiary is still going to pay taxes on income inherited when they're trying to exercise that income. So if they're inheriting income in the form of a 401k, an IRA, a trust, that income still gets taxed. I think the question when it comes to estates is people get wrapped around the axle as to who is paying that tax. Someone on one end or the other is going to be paying it. It's just a matter of whether or not it's the gifter or the giftee.
And finally, Maddie, give us just a minute here on possible stimulus for the economy from adjusting taxes. We heard from President Trump again and again and again about the payroll tax. He's come up with it again on this round again. He also mentioned capital gains tax. Are those things that actually could help an economy that goodness knows needs a lot of help?
They certainly could help. I think they would need to be part of a bigger approach to stimulus. Now, there are interesting questions when it comes to the payroll tax in the PPP loan program that you've likely been talking a lot about. Right now, the interaction between payroll taxes for employers for whom those loans are forgiven is somewhat in question. As the law is written right now and as how the IRS has interpreted this, if you get that loan forgiven, you no longer qualify for the payroll tax relief that was already passed into effect by the CARES Act. So I would keep an eye on whether or not that component is clarified. And also, there is an ongoing debate as to whether or not the wages themselves that employers are paying with those loans is deductible at all. I would say that if we can get clarity on that from the administration, that could be much more stimulative than simply looking at another payroll tax cut, because that kind of clarity is what businesses need as they're trying to get workers back into their shops and into their restaurants and trying to get the economy back online.
Maddie, thank you so very much. Always great to have you on when it comes to taxes. That's Maddie Doppler of the National Taxpayers Union. And coming up next, now we're going to have Bloomberg First Word News with Mark Crumpton. Mark?
Thank you. All U.S. airport security screeners will soon be required to wear masks. Bloomberg has learned the Transportation Security Administration, the TSA, is expected to make that announcement as soon as today. More than 500 TSA screeners have tested positive for COVID-19, including 6 who died. That's according to the agency's website. The use of masks by agency employees has been voluntary. California is projecting it will have a budget shortfall of $54.3 billion because of the economic devastation caused by the coronavirus. Today's announcement is a stunning reversal for a state that had a $21 billion surplus a year ago. California has been under a mandatory stay-at-home order since mid-March. Governor Gavin Newsom calls the numbers, quote, jaw-dropping. Fear of reinfection in recovered COVID-19 patients in China is growing. A new Chinese study has found that between 5% and 15% of people in the country who recovered from the virus may have tested positive again. Scientists aren't sure why this is happening, though some believe the problem may lie in inconsistencies in test results. The U.S. Supreme Court has tossed out the convictions of 2 allies of former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie for their roles in the 2013 George Washington Bridge lane closing scandal. The so-called Bridgegate created crippling traffic jams in Fort Lee, New Jersey, to punish that city's Democratic mayor for not endorsing Governor Christie's re-election bid. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries. I'm Mark Crumpton. This is Bloomberg.
Thanks very much, Mark. Coming up, Lyft reduced its quarterly loss last quarter despite the pandemic. And we're going to talk about that as our stock of the hour. That's coming up next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Westin. Ride-sharing services have really taken a hit from this pandemic, no question about it, but at the same time, Lyft actually cut very sharply its losses last quarter. Here to talk to us about our stock of the hour, which is Lyft, is Abigail Doolittle. So how did they do it, Abigail? You
know, David, this is a really interesting one because it's counterintuitive that they could, beat the numbers, which they essentially did, both earnings, a loss that was narrower than expected. They also beat revenues, the stock soaring in this virus environment, but that's exactly what happened. So in terms of how they did it, a big piece of it was the fact that they actually beat numbers that had already been lowered. So some analysts are actually calling this a head fake, saying that, it's not quite as good as it looks on the surface. As for for what did go right, even though active ridership was only up 3%, revenues were up. So the revenue per rider was up in a really nice way. But from the volume standpoint, what you have going on at this point, April down 75%. The last 3 weeks ticking up just a little bit. But overall, there's lots of questions on how they're going to operate going forward. They announced that they last week or 2 weeks ago that they cut their workforce. That's true too for Uber, which reports after the bell. And, you know, I certainly see the decline here in this city, walking to and from work. I might see one TLC license plate per walk. That was all you used to see. So definitely a massive decline in these cars going around.
But what about delivering things as opposed to having people go around in them? Because I have to say, out here in Westchester, we use services that deliver things from restaurants a fair amount.
Well, that's where they really need to go, and that's one concern on the part of analysts, because the analysts, rightly so, identifying that the ride-sharing business overall over the next year, maybe longer, depending on the virus, could be in a world of hurt. But if they were to diversify into delivering from grocery stores, restaurants, other stores, then they might really be able to survive this virus era. It's not clear whether or not they're going to do that. Again, that is one of the concerns of analysts. And you can see both Uber and Lyft down in a huge way since the IPO. These unicorns not doing quite what was expected. And of course, this virus not helping, David.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you so much to Abigail Doolittle for our Stock of the Hour, which is Lyft. That does it for the TV portion of Balance of Power, but on radio, we will continue for our second hour. We're going to be joined by Barbara Comstock. She's the former Congresswoman who is now representing the tech industry. This is Bloomberg.